grab your toque and prepare for a voyage to the ends of the earth on this episode of Geographical Thinking. Join us as I sit down with Anais Schaenzel, who recently embarked on a thrilling expedition to Antarctica. Armed with her passion for exploration and GIS expertise, Anais provides near real-time updates about her voyage, offering us a rare glimpse into the icy landscapes and breathtaking wildlife of Antarctica. Welcome back to Geographical Thinking. I'm Michelle Brake, and I'll be your guide as we explore ideas, stories, and conversations through the lens of geography. Joining me today is Anais Schaenzel, a GIS consultant working with New Zealand's Esri distributor, Eagle Technology. But Anais is more than just a consultant. She's an adventurer with a passion for conservation. In January, Anais embarked on an expedition to the sub-Antarctic islands of New Zealand and Australia, as well as Antarctica itself. Her mission? To educate others about the unique flora and fauna of these regions and advocate for their protection. Armed with GIS technology, Anais tracked the expedition's progress, sharing daily updates and captivating photos to bring the journey to life. Now back on solid ground, Anais is utilizing the power of GIS to continue her advocacy efforts and ensure the preservation of these landscapes for future generations to come. Thank you for joining me today, Anais, and welcome to Geographical Thinking.
Thanks, Michelle. It's awesome to be here.
Yeah, and we recently had a chance to touch base and see each other in person while we were at the Dev Summit in Palm Springs back in March.
We did. Yeah, it was lovely to meet you in person. Been an exciting year for me.
Right? Between coming to the US for that trip and then visiting Antarctica. Busy year. Did you get some other vacationing in around the conference?
I headed up to San Francisco, actually. I explored the US a little bit. It was my first time there as well. So, great start to the year for me. No complaints at all.
Amazing. And now, while New Zealand is relatively close to Antarctica compared to some places like where I'm visiting, or I guess where I'm calling from in Canada, it's still an undertaking of an adventure, and most people can only dream of taking this kind of adventure. How did your trip to Antarctica come to be?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think people often perceive New Zealand as being quite close to Antarctica. It actually took us probably about 3.5 days to get down there. We did do stops to the sub-Antarctic islands, so I don't know the exact amount of time it would take. But that's still quite a decent journey, in my opinion. But this kind of whole opportunity came to me through a scholarship, which is called the True Young Explorers Scholarship, run through Heritage Expeditions, which is the company and the ship that I went with. They offer this opportunity to young people 30 years and under, not just New Zealanders, it can be for anyone around the world. And it's kind of to give the young adults the opportunity to embark on an adventure of a lifetime and visit locations you would not really be able to get to easily otherwise. So as part of this voyage, we also visited the sub-Antarctic islands of New Zealand and Australia, some of them. And this is kind of quite a very difficult place to get to, these locations. They're very limited to the amount of people that can go, and it's actually a very important, or they are very important places to New Zealand's biodiversity, and you don't learn that much about them. So the whole idea about the True Young Explorer Scholarship is that the scholars come back and they will tell their story and become like ambassadors for the places that they have visited. So for me, the sub-Antarctic islands and Antarctica. And through telling your story, the hope is that we would advocate for future generations or for people to continue protecting these places that so few people visit, so few people kind of know about or know much about, to ensure that they stay protected for generations to come.
That sounds like an amazing program to showcase such amazing and ecologically important areas of our planet. I know going to Antarctica has always been one of my dreams, so hearing that this is something that could be open to people around the globe is pretty exciting.
Absolutely.
And yeah. I really enjoyed following along with the insight into your trip's day-to-day activities and the images you were able to share. I saw it early on. I think it was around day 5 or 6, maybe. So it was still on the way down to some of the subantarctic islands and the islands south of New Zealand. Eagle Technology, as your distributor down in New Zealand, had shared your experience builder that had all the information. And I was like, this is really cool. I want to follow this along, but also bring you on is great to hear more about it. I'm wondering, how did the idea to live blog and map the progress of your trip come about?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I had always wanted to kind of tell the story through the power of maps. That was my idea. I didn't really know how I was going to do that. And when I brought this up with my work, Eagle Technology, they were really supportive and they said they could offer me the platform to kind of host this. And then the idea kind of developed further. And we're like, well, instead of, creating something when I'm back, why not actually do it live while I'm there and have like daily updates and track the whole journey 24/7. And so that idea kind of came about that way. So what actually ended up happening is I used field maps to track the whole journey and 24/7, and I wrote daily updates, attached images, and those would then sync up to an experience builder on a daily basis. That was the idea. What was really awesome as well is that I had colleagues back home who got really on board with it, and they kind of created like a month of Antarctica for my workplace, and they created story maps and incorporated quick capture, which I was using while on the voyage as well, and that kind of added to the whole story as well through some of those story maps that they created and publicized the kind of whole voyage a bit more. So that was really awesome to have them on board.
And it's great to hear how supportive your office was and your colleagues, that you got to go on this adventure, but it's still somewhat of a team effort in the behind the scenes. Like it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to support maps.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it
Yeah.
was really awesome to have that support while I was on the voyage. And I had kind of very little chance to communicate with them as well. So I kind of left it in their hands. And when I came back and read through everything they'd done, I was blown away.
And that's a lot of trust in a process because over the past few years, there's been a large spike in digital nomads traveling and working from anywhere, but that's all typically based on land. What technology did you use to make this all work? And were there any challenges that you faced with the posting of the updates and getting connected every day?
Yeah, so I went with field maps to do my updates purely for the fact that I wanted to be able to do it offline. And the reason for that was because I didn't know what my connectivity was going to be like. My workplace then kind of offered me a box, like a Starlink, portable Starlink box that I could take called the Eagle Mobile Comms box. And this is essentially a box that holds a Starlink dish and it runs off batteries. So it's got the batteries in the box as well. And it allowed me to wheel it out on a daily basis, set it up, connect to internet through satellites for a few minutes, and easily sync up my updates. And that allowed me to do it daily. The kind of unsure or the uncertainty we had was how well it would work in the Antarctic region. So if you look at maps of Starlink satellites around the globe, the concentration of satellites around Antarctica hugely decreases. And so we weren't really sure if I was going to get connection down there at all, but I still wanted to be able to write my updates kind of on a daily basis so that it was fresh in my mind. So it was important for me to have an offline mode. What actually ended up happening is the Starlink was amazing and it worked every single day. I think the most challenging thing was actually on my part and keeping to a time schedule of writing and getting updates out there, because we had such busy days. And while we were in Antarctica, it was 24-hour daylight, so you have no sense of time. And I kind of moved from making updates every night to writing updates every night and then actually syncing them up every morning. Because the nights, we ended up doing excursions at like 2 in the morning, and at that point, I just wanted to go to sleep rather than set up a Starlink, even though it only takes a few minutes. I needed my sleep as well.
That's understandable. Being refreshed and ready for the adventure, I feel like is a big part of it. And as someone who did follow along while you were posting, from my side, it all looked like it worked great. Very seamless experience from an armchair adventurer.
That's
Um,
good to hear.
yeah. But seeing the landscape and animals that you encountered were some of my personal highlights from your postings. I'm sure with everything being a high point on the trip, was there any one aspect that stood out as being a highlight or anything that surprised you?
Yeah, you're right. Everything was a highlight. So it is very difficult to kind of choose one thing. But for me, I have a science background, and the wildlife there really stood out to me in the subantarctic islands and in Antarctica. So one of the, I think, most amazing days I had was on Macquarie Island. And we got to walk onto this beach that had two penguin colonies, the royal and king penguins, and just walk in amongst these penguins, trying to keep a 5 meter distance, which was almost impossible because they would come up and kind of scout you out and give you a sniff and check you out. They were very inquisitive. And you could just sit there or stand there for hours and watch these penguins. It was an absolutely incredible day.
I could imagine the don't pet the wildlife rule is a very hard experience. I don't know if you've seen that the meme of the child who's like, I want to pet that dog, but it's a bear. Very much me with animals out in the wild sometimes.
Yeah, you've got to be careful, and you definitely have to be careful in these places that I visited because there's so little human interaction, and we don't want to be bringing anything to them that could, cause a bad effect.
Which is a very important point. And I know we have similar things here in Canada where, like, if you're going from Nova Scotia to Newfoundland via ferry, like, they check over your vehicles to make sure there's no soil or specific things you're taking. Or if you fly to the Hawaiian Islands, there's very specific rules on what you can or can't bring with you.
Mm,
Biodiversity security, very big deal. I guess one thing
yeah,
I'm wondering,
massive.
because I've heard some gossip about penguins that they're a little on the smelly side. Can you confirm or deny? Are the seals making up rumors?
Oh, well, the seals are pretty smelly themselves, so it would be fair enough if they were making rumors. But the penguins, they do definitely smell. You can smell them before you see them, I would say. But I think if you've got a good scarf that you can put around your nose and the wind direction's blowing in the right way, it's bearable.
Okay, that's good to know. Plan in advance for a scarf, some headgear if encountering penguins and seals.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, I would count seals in that list, definitely.
Okay, good to know. I guess anything else about the climate that may have surprised you? I know I've heard it can be a little dry down there.
Yeah, that really took me by surprise. So we kind of spent a day slowly approaching Antarctica, and you could kind of see it getting bigger and bigger. And you know it's a big kind of frozen continent, uh, but you don't really realize it, I think, until you see it. And we kind of started seeing like these mountains appear, and like icebergs and ice and penguins, and it was just became more and more real as the hours went by on that day. And it was just beautiful to see. It's such a vast and empty continent, and it gives you a perspective of what a place can be like with very little kind of human interaction. There's not much on Antarctica other than scientific bases and some tourism. But the other thing that really stood out was the dryness, as you say, of Antarctica. You can really feel it on your skin. I was lathering myself up with moisturizer to just try and stay moist. But the other thing was we kind of walked amongst Adelie penguin colonies, and it was really cool to see. But what took me by surprise, and I didn't realize this was going to be the case, is that the penguins that unfortunately die, they mummify rather than kind of rot because it's such a dry, cold place. And so the colonies are actually scattered with these mummified penguins, and it's a bit kind of morbid, but I guess it's the reality of life there. The other thing, I guess, is we had the opportunity to visit some historical huts. So Shackleton's hut, Scott Hut, from explorers from over 100 years ago in Antarctica, some of the first. And these huts have been just kind of preserved in this place because it's so dry and nothing rots. So it's like stepping back in time more than 100 years ago. It was really cool to see.
No, and that's really interesting to hear because I know in the Canadian Arctic and some of the polar deserts and tundra regions, that dryness and things being preserved does happen as well. So it's interesting to see the parallels in similar types of climates, which would make sense with rules of geography of similar things being similar. But it's definitely interesting to hear about the preservation, which I know we see with some of the like explorer buildings and things. Interesting to see some parallels there. Now I'm wondering, in what ways has your experience in Antarctica impacted your perspective on the environment or conservation of the Arctic climates?
Yeah, it's a good question. So what was really cool was during this voyage, we had kind of guides that would specialize in different areas, and they would give us lectures when we kind of had a free period to talk about what we had seen or were going to see. And it gave us a really kind of good understanding of how things work or how the kind of ecosystem in these places work. And what they also talked about was kind of the impacts of human, and you could kind of see it. So when we went to Macquarie Island, for example, one of the penguin colonies is massive. It just takes over the whole beach. But on this beach are some kind of big drums, and these drums used to be used to boil penguins. And way back then, they kind of desiccated the penguin population, but they've come back and they've taken over this beach and surrounded these drums, and that's kind of quite cool to see. That after some kind of regulations were put in place, these species can jump back to a similar population to what they had. The same as for the like New Zealand fur seals, there was a similar problem. They were hunted almost to extinction. And then in Antarctica, you see like a continent that has been barely touched by humans. There is human interaction, and there is things like fishing for fish and krill going on there. But it shows you, I think it's very rare to see a place where there's been so little human interaction, and it gives you appreciation for this place, especially a place like Antarctica where it is so harsh to live. And you see like these penguins and whales and seals living there, and it just gives you such a huge appreciation for these species and places, and makes you kind of want to advocate and protect them because they are vulnerable, and they are complex, and it is very easy to kind of disturb the ecosystem balance in these places.
Which I think is a really interesting point where we see with outdoor recreation that we want to go to these places, but there's that limitation of, okay, well, how many people is this over visitation? What is the impact on the land? And it's the hard part of adventuring of what is the balance. And I'm always wondering, like, how can we better communicate this? So I'm wondering, in terms of what comes next, has this inspired you to want to pursue further conservation or advocacy work?
Yeah, so the geo blog for me was kind of a fun thing to do during the journey. I didn't go into much detail, kind of about facts and figures or anything like that. I talked about what I was seeing and doing every day, to kind of get the word out there, I guess. But I would really like to kind of take some of those learnings that I got and expand on those, and again, probably use GIS concepts to do this, because that's the route I've gone down, and that's what I like to do. So my hope is to further expand kind of my geo blog and provide more information about some of those learnings I had. The other idea that myself and a friend who also got the scholarship and was on the ship with me had, we kind of want to create like a program for schools, or go to schools and actually tell them or tell these students our stories, because I think the best way to communicate is to go to like students and the younger generation and get them excited or interested in these places so that throughout the generation, these places will stay protected. The other thing is the sub-Antarctic islands in New Zealand. As I've said, they're very important to New Zealand's biodiversity. They have species that aren't found anywhere else in New Zealand, but we actually learn very little about them. And I think kind of a change in that education would be beneficial, and I think would really interest a lot of students around New Zealand.
I think that's another great point, and I think it resonates here within Canada because we have the territories and some northern parts of provinces that people don't really get to visit. They don't get to experience. So we have to hear about them through secondhand and get an appreciation that way for ecologically important areas. And it's
Mm.
such an important thing. Yeah. So I'm wondering, do you have any advice to people looking to champion conservation or contemplating trips to these areas that they're passionate about conserving?
Yeah, it's tricky because these places are very difficult to get to. As I've been saying, there's there's not really regular ferries that go to the sub-Antarctic islands or, Antarctica. You have to be a scientist or, get a scholarship or be able to afford a cruise down to these places, which is something that young people usually can't do, which is the great thing about the scholarship that gives young adults the opportunity to do this. But I think even if you have an interest in these places, you can do a lot from kind of your own home, your own bedroom, and educate yourself about these and these places and kind of lobby or advocate for them from where you are. And you never know, maybe an opportunity will come up like it did for me, and you'll be able to go to these places and visit them for real. But you're right, it's very difficult to kind of have a balance between how many people can visit these places that have very little human impact versus, how much should we protect them from humans?
Yeah, and I think coming into that, for a future episode that we're doing of geographical thinking for a game show episode. So listen closely, you'll get your answers now for a future episode. I know for Antarctica, for visitation last year, I was surprised with some of the numbers for visitation that cruise only visits were just under 33,000. Makes sense. Okay. A fair amount of people staying on the cruise, not getting off. Deep field visitors, so people going further from the coast and actually going into the continent, whether that's for research purposes or some adventure purposes. That was 821. Okay, that's small number, small impact. But landed visits, so people keeping fairly close within a few kilometers of the shoreline, was 71,000, which surprised me as such a large number when I think, okay, well, like how many people go to Everest Base Camp every year, like that get permits and things? Well, that number is even higher than that. How the balance between like outdoor recreation, which we do need to help enable some scientific research and conservation. So those deep field visit numbers make sense there, but how much visitation is too much visitation? And I never know, like, because Antarctica is such a collective of geopolitical groups, how do you manage that? I guess any thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
you're right. It's complicated, um, because in a way you need people to go to these places so that they maintain an interest or, like me, tell people their stories. But then at the same time, you can't have everyone visiting these places because they won't be what they once were, if you have mass tourism. In Antarctica, it is kind of like a geopolitical thing because there is the Antarctic Treaty, which is signed by 56 nations. And it kind of designates Antarctica as a natural reserve that's devoted to peace and science. So no one has one claim over Antarctica, really, right? And how do you, tell people, oh no, you can't visit, right? Everyone kind of has a right to go to Antarctica in a way. That I guess the good thing there is that there are so many nations that are wanting to protect Antarctica, and everyone has kind of this one goal. And that's not really found anywhere else around the world that I know of. So I think that makes Antarctica quite special. I suppose the other thing is in Antarctica, they have this kind of thing called the IOTO, and it's the International Association for Antarctic Tour Operations, and it kind of provides regulations and guides for responsible travel in Antarctica. So we kind of touched base before in the podcast about biodiversity and kind of protecting these places. So we, before we went to Antarctica or the subantarctic islands, we kind of went through a big process of cleaning all our gear and making sure we weren't bringing anything to these places. And when we were at these places, we were keeping distances from animals as best we could. As I said, penguins is sometimes difficult to. But other kind of animals we were keeping our distance from, and we were kind of trying to not bring or leave a big footprint per se, right? And I think that helps to reduce the amount of impact that tourists are having in Antarctica. But you're right, 70,000 people on land, and it's over a couple of months, right? Because you go over summer. That I can imagine that is a big impact that needs to probably, be regulated. And how do you do that? Not sure I have the answer to that.
That's a fair point, and I think you brought up an important element there with the combo of nations that work together under this treaty to help preserve Antarctica, that maybe we can pull the best things from each of them together of, okay, at some point there will have to be policies in place. I know within conservation and scientific research, we have those observation periods. So I think that might be where we're currently at. And eventually we'll get to the point of what comes next. So hopefully we can grab the best bits and bobs from all of them.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. I think it's something to look out for in the future. I think it's a fast developing space.
I guess moving forward, do you have any words of inspiration for budding adventurers that are thinking of where to go next? What can they do?
Yeah, definitely. So I've always had an interest in Antarctica, and I never thought I would get the opportunity to go other than perhaps if I saved up and went on a cruise. But then this opportunity kind of came to me, and I was like, well, I'm not going to let this go. I have to go. This is my once in a lifetime opportunity to get to see Antarctica and the subantarctic islands. So I guess my message really is, if you are interested in a place and you really want to visit it, or you really want to advocate for it, then don't give up. Opportunities arise, like this scholarship. I'm sure there's scholarships in Canada as well for similar opportunities. Really, don't give up, try and take on these opportunities. And even if, now's not the right time to go on a month-long trip, then there's things you can do from home as well, like keeping up to date with what's happening in these places that you're interested in and advocating for them or educating people in them. There's always so much that you can do. So yeah, I guess my message is, if you're interested in a place, if a place really has meaning to you, then don't give up and take on any opportunities that come your way.
Amazing. And with that, we'll leave you with that inspiring message of hope from Anais. Thank you for joining me today on Geographical Thinking.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Amazing. So thank you for joining us on this frosty adventure on Geographical Thinking. I hope you enjoyed tagging along with Anais as she shared her incredible journey to Antarctica. From icy landscapes to incredible wildlife encounters, it's been an expedition to remember. And another thing to keep in mind, as we explore these remote corners of the Earth, let's keep conservation at the forefront of our minds, ensuring these precious environments remain protected for generations to come. If you're looking for more information about the technical side of GIS, check out the Spatial Report podcast, where Mark and Maggie dive into the latest and greatest in the world of GIS. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep thinking geographically.